September 20th, 1944, Arracourt, near Nancy, France. A thin, fabric-skinned Piper L4 grasshopper skims low over the fields like it's late for a message run. But down below, the ground is turning into a math problem that can get men killed in minutes. German armored vehicles are moving. US troops are trying to hold the line, and the window to stop a push like this doesn't stay open for long. The L4 isn't supposed to be here for this. It's an observation plane, a spotter, a liaison taxi. The kind of aircraft you send up when you need eyes. Not firepower because it has no armor, no speed to run, and no business being anywhere near a battlefield where rifles can reach it. And yet this one is carrying something the manuals never planned for bazookas bolted to the wing struts. The pilot is Lieutenant Colonel Charles Carpenter, Bazooka Charlie, and the people who saw his setup for the first time didn't call it innovative. They laughed. Because the idea sounds ridiculous on paper, take the slowest, lightest airplane in the area and turn it into an anti-tank attacker. If you're looking at doctrine, it's not just ridiculous, it's forbidden by intent. The Army restricts L4 grasshoppers to reconnaissance, artillery spotting, liaison work. That's the rule. That's the boundary. And boundaries exist for a reason. A single burst of small arms fire can tear through an L4 like it isn't there. But the battlefield doesn't care what an aircraft was designed to do. Here's the core problem on this morning in Lorraine. Armored vehicles don't give you time to negotiate with the rule book. When German tanks and other armored units start moving with purpose, you either disrupt them early, or you end up reacting too late, watching positions buckle. Watching roads get cut. Watching every delay turn into a bigger price paid by the guys on the ground. Carpenter is attached in support of the US Army's 4th Armored Division during the Lorraine campaign. He knows what his airplane is allowed to do. He also knows what happens if the enemy's armor keeps rolling without being checked. An L4 can spot. It can relay. It can correct fire. But sometimes the problem isn't we can't see them. Sometimes the problem is we can see them. And we still can't stop them fast enough. So Carpenter chooses the kind of solution that makes professionals shake their heads. He ignores the boundary and goes straight at the thing an L4 was never built to fight. The crazy idea is simple in words and insane in practice. Mount bazookas to the plane. Fly very low, and make attack runs against German armor so close that the enemy doesn't have to guess what you're doing. They just have to decide to shoot back. Because that's the other half of the problem. If the Germans even classify you as a threat, you're dead. A grasshopper can't shrug off damage. It can't trade hits. It can't tank anything. It survives on being overlooked. Carpenter is betting on surprise. On disbelief, on the split-second delay when the enemy sees a tiny observation plane and assumes it's only there to watch until it isn't. And before this day is over, that bet will produce a number that sounds like a Type 04 tanks knocked out in one battle. Not because the L4 suddenly became a fighter. Not because the rules changed, but because one pilot decided the rules were irrelevant to what was happening on the ground. If you want to see how a bazooka plane holds up when the enemy stops laughing and starts firing back, hit like and subscribe for more true WWII stories like this. Back to Carpenter. He brings the nose down until the hedgerows start rushing toward him. The target is armored German panthers, among it metal moving with confidence because it expects threats from the usual places. Carpenter lines up anyway. Knowing every yard he descends makes him easier to kill, and more likely to hit. Carpenter brings the nose down until the hedgerows start sliding past beneath the wings, and before you even get to the first rocket. The real fight starts inside his own side, the resistance, and the rules. Because the Army didn't build the Piper L4 Grasshopper to fight. It built it to see. The L4 is a floating set of eyes, slow, light, steady, meant to orbit above the front and turn what it spots into something useful. Artillery corrections, warnings, Liaison messages, the quiet coordination that keeps units from drifting into chaos. That's why commanders protect these little aircraft, and why the doctrine around them is so strict. Lose one. And you don't just lose a pilot. You lose the vision that helps everyone else survive. So the boundary is simple: stay out of direct combat. Don't mix it up at low altitude. Don't chase targets. Don't do anything that turns a fragile Bazooka plane into a magnet for rifles and machine guns. The Grasshopper has no armor to absorb a mistake, no speed to run from trouble, and no power to climb away if the enemy decides to take it seriously. A fighter can dive, fire, and climb back to safety. An L4 can't. If you get hit in the wrong place, you're not damaged, you're gone. That's why people laugh at the bazooka setup, not because it's a clever joke, but because it looks like a shortcut to a funeral. A fabric and wood aircraft with rocket launchers bolted to the wing struts sounds like a stunt, something you do once for morale, not something you do when German armor is actually moving. And the deeper objection isn't emotional, it's practical. If the enemy ever classifies you as a threat, you die. An observation plane survives largely because it's overlooked. Carpenter is trying to survive while doing the exact thing that makes an enemy stop overlooking him. Then there's the second layer of the problem, the weapon itself. A bazooka was designed for a soldier at close range, one shot. Then move. Tanks are hard targets even when you're on the ground. Aiming carefully, with your feet planted, from a tiny airplane. You're trying to hit a small section of moving armor while your own aircraft is moving, bouncing in air currents, and forcing you to commit to a straight line long enough for everyone below to get a good look at you. There's no stabilized gun sight, no computer, no clean press button. Get kill. Just a pilot trying to time a low pass and make a rocket land somewhere that matters before the ground wakes up and starts firing back. This is where the rulebook feels comforting to everyone except the man in the cockpit. On paper. The correct play is obvious: stay high. Spot targets, call them in, let artillery or tank destroyers handle armor, but Lorraine isn't paper. Carpenter is attached in support of the 4th Armored Division, and he's watching the battlefield like a clock that's running down. Sometimes the problem isn't finding the tanks, it's stopping them fast enough. Armor doesn't give you time to debate process. When it starts moving with purpose, the distance closes fast, roads get cut, positions get isolated, and every delay costs somebody on the ground. So Carpenter makes a bet that doctrine doesn't quantify surprise buys seconds. German crews don't look up at a Grasshopper and think attacker. They think spotter. A nuisance, something to ignore until more urgent threats are handled. Carpenter is counting on that first heartbeat of disbelief, the moment when the enemy sees a tiny liaison plane and assumes it's only there to watch. He's trying to turn that disbelief into a window, one low pass, one shot, one pull-up before every rifle and machine gun swings toward him. But the same logic makes his plan brutally time-limited. The first run might catch them off guard. The second run is when they start shooting. The third run is when they start aiming. And once the Germans understand what he's doing, the laughter stops, and the aircraft that used to be ignored becomes the aircraft they hunt. That's the resistance not just from skeptical officers or the official mission definitions, but from physics, from lethality, from the simple fact that an L4 can't afford to be brave in the way a fighter can. Carpenter's crazy idea only works if he stays low enough to hit, but not low long enough to die threading a needle where the margin is measured in seconds. Under the low ceiling over Arracourt, Carpenter's Bazooka Plane looks like the worst idea on the battlefield. The fog is thick enough to hide an armored column until it's already in motion. If you can't see tanks, you can't spot them cleanly. And if you can't spot them, the L4 is reduced to what the rulebook always said: it was a fragile liaison kite with nothing to contribute except radio calls. Then the weather cracks open just enough to show what's really happening below German armor, moving with intent. This is the kind of movement that doesn't wait for paperwork or perfect coordination. Once tanks start pushing through gaps, the timeline compresses, a problem turns into a breakthrough fast, and everyone on the ground pays for every minute you lose. The doctrinal play is obvious: stay high. Observe. Report, call in fire, let heavier assets do the killing. Carpenter chooses the opposite. He drops the nose and commits to the one thing an L4 was never meant to do. He goes low enough to place a shot. Not just describe a threat. From the ground, the grasshopper still looks harmless. That's the point. It's slow, light, and so out of place in a direct fight that the first instinct isn't panic, it's dismissal. But under the wings are bazookas mounted to the struts, improvised. Crude, and completely wrong for the aircraft. The first attack run is a pure gamble in geometry and nerve. To fire, he has to fly straight long enough to line up, which means he has to stay predictable long enough for every rifle on the ground to track him. He can't outrun anything. He can't absorb a hit. His only protection is the enemy's hesitation, the split second where German crews see a tiny spotter and don't immediately treat it like a threat. A rocket leaves the wing and vanishes into the chaos below. Carpenter doesn't need a Hollywood explosion to know whether it worked. He's looking for a battlefield signal, a vehicle stopping when it shouldn't, smoke where there wasn't any, crews bailing, a formation stuttering, a disruption, proof that the idea isn't just funny, proof it's functional. That proof comes quickly enough to change everything. In the same fight, he gets credit for knocking out an armored vehicle in early. Undeniable result that says this setup can damage real targets in real combat. It's not the headline number yet, but it's the first receipt. And it's more important than people realize, because the moment that receipt exists, the enemy adapts. Up to that point, an L4 could sometimes survive because it wasn't worth the effort. After that first success, Carpenter becomes worth the effort. The Germans stop ignoring the grasshopper and start trying to kill it every time it appears. That shift, more than any single vehicle destroyed, is the small win that matters. It proves the idea landed hard enough in the enemy's brain to force a response. Now the Bazooka Plane isn't just attacking armor, it's fighting attention. Small arms fire that would be background noise to a tougher aircraft becomes lethal to him. A burst that misses his body can still hit fabric. Struts, control cables, anything that turns flight into a coin toss, and he's carrying a finite number of shots. Once the rockets are gone, he has to get out, land, rearm, and come back. As if this is normal work. That's how a mocked gimmick becomes a real weapon. The enemy starts treating it like one. Carpenter has crossed the line from nuisance to threat, and there's no going back. The first proof isn't the final tally. It's the moment the laughter stops because the battlefield, and the Germans on it, have confirmed that this ridiculous idea can actually hurt them. The first time the rockets leave the wings and something real on the ground stops moving the way it's supposed to. Carpenter gets what he needed: most proof. But proof has a price. The battlefield doesn't stay surprised for long. On his next pass, the nuisance spotter is no longer a nuisance, it's a target. The same little grasshopper that used to be ignored starts drawing fire the way a threat does rifles snapping up. Tracers reaching. Men suddenly eager to erase the joke before it becomes a habit. And Carpenter feels that change instantly, because his airplane gives him no margin for error. A fighter pilot can take a few holes and still climb out. Carpenter's L4 is fabric and light structure. A handful of hits in the wrong place doesn't mean damage. It means the controls go soft. The wing starts to shudder. The engine coughs at the worst moment. The aircraft becomes a falling lesson in why the doctrine existed. So he adapts. Fast, he stops treating the run like a clean, straight line and starts flying it like a street fight, using terrain, using timing, using the fact that the enemy has to believe in the threat before it can organize against it. He comes in lower, then breaks away sooner. He shifts his approach so the ground gunners have less time to track him. He forces the Germans to keep re-aiming, and every second they spend trying to solve his angle is a second their armor isn't doing what it came here to do. That's the escalation nobody sees from the outside. People imagine the crazy part is bolting bazookas onto a grasshopper. The crazier part is staying alive after the battlefield learns you're serious, because the L4 is not a hit-and-run platform. It's a hit-and-pray you can run platform. Every attack pass is a commitment. He has to hold the airplane steady long enough to fire, which means he has to accept being predictable for a moment. He can't throw the stick around wildly without ruining his own aim. He can't climb high and dive like a fighter because he doesn't have the performance to play that game. He's threading a needle low enough to place rockets where they matter, stable enough to make them count, and fast enough, meaning quick enough in decision-making to get out before the enemy's volume of fire catches up to him. And the Germans don't need a cannon to kill him. They just need to decide that he's worth killing. The terrifying thing about small arms fire against a fragile airplane is that it doesn't have to be accurate in a sniper sense. It only has to be persistent. A burst that doesn't hit Carpenter can still tear fabric. A burst that doesn't tear fabric can still nick a strut. A nicked strut can become a failure under load. A failure under load becomes a crash that no hero narrative can undo. So the stakes grow with every minute he stays in the pattern. He has limited shots. Bazookas aren't an endless belt. Once he fires what he brought, he can't just keep pressing. He has to leave the fight and land to rearm, which sounds simple until you realize what it means tactically every time he disengages. The German armor gets time back, time to reposition, time to tuck into cover, time to keep moving, time to make the ground war uglier. And now there's another pressure building expectations. At the start, the Bazooka Plane is a novelty, an idea that makes people smirk because it feels like a stunt. But once it works, once the enemy reacts, Carpenter can't pretend it's just a one-off anymore. The guys on the ground are watching. If they see an L4 come in low, fire, and disrupt armor even for a moment, it changes what they believe is possible. It becomes something they want again, especially when they're staring at German steel and feeling outmatched in the next few minutes. Carpenter is attached in support of the 4th Armored Division. That matters because he isn't operating in a vacuum. His decisions aren't about personal glory. They're about whether a push is slowed, whether a unit gets breathing room, whether a line holds long enough for heavier forces to respond. His aircraft may be tiny, but the consequences of what he does ripple outward because when armor is moving, any disruption is leverage. So the crazy idea starts turning into an unofficial tool, not officially blessed, not formally written into the mission, but used. And that's when the social constraint gets sharper. 2. Because there's a difference between we're amused by your improvisation and we're responsible for letting you keep doing it. A commander who tolerates a stunt can laugh it off. A commander who tolerates a tactic has to answer for it. If Carpenter gets shot down, the question won't be, why did the Germans shoot an observer? The question will be, why was an observer attacking tanks in the first place? Carpenter knows that. He can feel it in every skeptical glance. Every pause before permission is implied rather than written. Every moment where his success makes the adults in the room uncomfortable. Because now they're trapped between two realities, the rules say stop, and the results say keep going. That tension pushes him into a narrower corridor. He can't afford a failure that looks like recklessness. He can't afford a sloppy run. He can't afford to waste rockets. Every move has to justify itself in outcomes, because outcomes are the only argument strong enough to keep the door open for this kind of improvisation. So he becomes methodical, in a way people don't expect from a man flying a ridiculous aircraft. He picks moments when armor is exposed, when the formation is stretching, when vehicles are forced into predictable paths, when a tank has to crest or turn or slow for terrain. He uses the L4's weird strengths. It can loiter, it can turn tight, it can stay near the fight long enough to see patterns. A fast aircraft might get one look and be gone. Carpenter can hover at the edge of danger, watching long enough to choose the best chance he'll get. But loitering has a cost now, because the enemy is looking for him. The longer he's around, the more time German gunners have to coordinate. The more time they have, the more disciplined the fire becomes. What starts as random shots turns into purposeful bursts. What starts as drive him off becomes bring him down. And you can hear the escalation in the way the sky feels. The air isn't empty anymore. It's full of intent. Carpenter keeps coming anyway. Not because he believes he's invincible, but because he believes the window is closing. Armor fights are decided by momentum. If the German push keeps its rhythm, the ground takes damage that can't be reversed easily. Carpenter's job, as he sees it, is to break that rhythm, force a pause, force a turn, force a crew to button up and hesitate. Even a small hesitation can buy the ground troops time to reposition, time to get guns into place, time to turn a scramble into a stand. That's what makes the stakes bigger. He's no longer proving a concept. He's being used as a wedge in a real fight. And the more he succeeds, the more dangerous it becomes, because the enemy's attention hardens around him. The grasshopper stops being a punchline and starts being a problem. By the time the day's fight is leaning toward its decisive moments, Carpenter is operating in the most unforgiving space a pilot can choose: low, slow, exposed, and now expected. The Germans know he's coming. His side is quietly hoping he does. He's running out of the one resource that kept him safe at the start: disbelief. Which means if he's going to keep this working, he needs something else: better timing, cleaner runs, and a willingness to press in close enough to matter even when every gun below is finally treating him like a real attacker. And that sets the stage for what happens next when Carpenter doesn't just disrupt armor, or scare crews, or notch a small victory. He goes after the kind of result that forces everyone, friend and enemy, to stop calling it a joke. By the time Carpenter circles back for the run that matters, the battlefield has changed its posture. The first proof is gone. The laughter is gone. And the one advantage a slow observation plane normally has being ignored is evaporating minute by minute. Down below, German armor is doing what armor does when it smells a seam. It presses. It probes. It turns movement into pressure. On the ground, pressure has a way of spreading. One unit leans back. The next one has to cover more space. And suddenly you're not fighting a neat line anymore, you're fighting the clock. Carpenter understands the ugly truth of that kind of fight. A tank doesn't need to win in the cinematic sense, it just needs to keep rolling until everyone else is forced to react. If the German formation keeps its rhythm, the Americans are stuck playing defense with their hands full. If that rhythm breaks, if crews hesitate, if vehicles stop, if the advance stutters, then the ground has time to reorganize. That's what Carpenter is trying to buy. He drops low again, not because it's dramatic, but because that's where a bazooka has a chance to matter. High and safe is good for observation. Low and exposed is the only place this crazy idea can actually do anything to steal. And now the Germans are looking for him. That changes the feel of everything. The air around the grasshopper stops feeling like empty space and starts feeling like a place where intent lives. He can sense it in the way heads turn, in the way weapons track, in the way a vehicle that was focused forward suddenly seems to angle, like it's trying to solve him. The first pass of the climax is not a heroic charge. It's a controlled, deliberate line. Carpenter knows he has to keep the airplane steady long enough to fire. And he knows every second he stays steady is a second he can be hit. So he does it anyway. He lines the nose up on an armored vehicle that isn't just there, but exposed enough that a hit could actually count. He commits, fires, and breaks away as fast as the little aircraft will let him, because the instant the rockets leave the wing, the ground's reaction sharpens. You can feel the enemy's mindset change when something they didn't respect becomes a problem. There's a difference between random shots and purposeful fire. Random shots are annoyance. Purposeful fire is a plan. Carpenter sees the result of that first run in the only way he can. The target stops behaving like a machine that's still in the fight. It stalls, it smokes, it draws frantic movement, and in the middle of a battle where armored vehicles are supposed to keep pushing, a stop like that is a big deal. That's one. The number matters, but the consequence matters more. One disabled or destroyed tank isn't just a tally mark, it's a disruption in formation. It's a moment where German crews have to look sideways instead of forward. It's a split in attention, and attention is the battlefield currency Carpenter is trading in. He swings around for a second pass knowing it's going to be worse. Not because the Germans have better weapons, but because they've accepted the threat. The disbelief window is closed. Now it's just exposure. This second run is where discipline starts to appear from below. He has less time before fire comes up, less time before tracking becomes accurate, less space to make mistakes. He stays low enough to keep the shot plausible. He holds steady long enough to fire. The rockets go, and he pulls away again. Hard, because staying in the lane any longer is how a slow plane dies. And again. Something on the ground changes in a way it shouldn't if the Germans are in control. Another armored vehicle stops moving like part of an advance and starts moving like an emergency. That's two. Now it's no longer an odd moment. It's a pattern. You can imagine what that does to German crews. Tanks are built to dominate the ground fight. They're trained to fear mines. Artillery, other tanks, dedicated attack aircraft, things the mind naturally recognizes as threats. A tiny observation plane is not supposed to be on that list. When it starts taking vehicles out of the fight, it creates a psychological jam. It forces the enemy to respect a threat they weren't ready to respect. And respect, in this case, means shooting at him with everything they can. Carpenter's third pass is where the margin narrows to something almost absurd. The grasshopper is still slow, still light, still unarmored. But now the battlefield is actively trying to erase it. The air in front of him feels hostile in a way it didn't earlier, because the ground isn't just reacting anymore, it's anticipating. He has to choose his moment. He can't waste a run on a target that's partially hidden or already moving into cover. He's not a bomber dropping a pattern. He's a pilot taking a low shot with a weapon never designed for aerial work. If he's going to risk a straight line under fire, it has to be for a payoff that changes the ground fight. So he commits again. He comes in low, lines up on armor that's still trying to push, and fires. This time, the reaction below is immediate and violent. The Germans aren't watching him anymore. They're trying to kill him. Tracers reach up. The air around the cockpit becomes a place you don't want to linger. Carpenter does not linger. He breaks away the moment he can. He climbs only as much as he has to, because climbing makes him visible longer, and visibility is death. Then he looks back down. The third target is no longer pushing. It's no longer part of the moving spear. It's out of rhythm smoke. Confusion. A sudden absence of forward motion where there should have been momentum. That's three. At this point, the logical brain in any headquarters would tell him to stop. 3 tanks is already an insane result for an aircraft that isn't supposed to be firing anything at all. 3 tanks is already more than enough to prove the concept. But Carpenter isn't flying a concept. He's flying a mission shaped by necessity. And necessity doesn't care what's enough. It cares about what's happening next. The German formation is still there. The pressure hasn't vanished. The ground still needs time. And Carpenter knows something that defines people who change outcomes under stress once you've crossed the line into the fight. You don't get to pretend you were just visiting. So he goes back in for a fourth pass, the one that turns the story into the number in the title. This run feels different, because now the enemy expects him. There's no surprise left to spend. The only thing left is execution. Timing. A clean line. A quick shot. An even quicker exit. He drops in low again. The little L4 is almost offensively fragile compared to what it's attacking, like a paper thing daring steel to flinch. But it doesn't win by being tough. It wins by being underestimated for just long enough to land damage where it counts. Carpenter holds the aircraft steady, fires, and breaks away through a curtain of return fire that's no longer confused. It's focused. It's the battlefield doing what it always does once it learns. And then down below, another tank stops being part of an advance. That's 4. 4 tanks in one battle, taken out of the fight by a pilot in a slow observation plane that wasn't supposed to fire a single shot at anything tougher than a radio antenna. The number isn't just a brag. It's an operational fact. It means 4 armored vehicles aren't pushing, aren't threatening, aren't forcing US troops to fall back or scramble. It means the German spear has been blunted by something that shouldn't have existed in the combat equation. And it means Carpenter has done the one thing that changes how war is remembered. He's produced a result so specific and so difficult to dismiss that even the skeptics have to deal with it, because you can laugh at a contraption in a hangar. You can't laugh at 4 disabled tanks on a battlefield where every tank matters. In the immediate moment, the ground troops don't turn it into a legend. They don't have time. They take the breathing room. They use the pause. They shift, reposition, reinforce, because that's what bought time is for. And Carpenter, still alive in an aircraft that should have been shredded the moment it revealed itself as a threat, pulls away knowing he's just done something that will follow him for the rest of the war. The enemy will remember. His own commanders will remember. The people who laughed will remember. Most of all, the rule book will have to remember, because a rule is only as strong as its ability to survive contact with results. When Carpenter finally pulls the L4 away from the fight, the relief isn't cinematic. It's physical. The kind you feel in your hands when you realize you've been gripping the controls too hard for too long. His airplane is still a grasshopper, still fragile, still one bad hit away from being a wreck in a field. But now it's carrying a different kind of weight proof the battlefield can't ignore. On the ground, the immediate effect is simple and measurable. 4 tanks that were part of an armored push are no longer pushing. They're burning, disabled, or abandoned, whatever the exact condition in each case. The result is the same. The German formation loses momentum at the exact moment momentum matters most. Armor thrives on rhythm. It's a machine designed to keep moving forward while everyone else scrambles. When vehicles stop, crews hesitate. When crews hesitate, units bunch up. When units bunch up, they become easier to hit and easier to delay. Carpenter hasn't won the battle by himself, but he has done something tactically valuable. He has forced time back onto the American side. That's what 4 tanks really means in a fight like this. It means 4 crews aren't advancing. 4 guns aren't bearing down on the next position. 4 armored silhouettes aren't forcing US troops to relocate under pressure. It means a column that expected to be threatened only by the usual killer's artillery. Tank destroyers. Other tanks has been forced to deal with a threat it never planned for. And that kind of surprise doesn't just break vehicles. It breaks assumptions, which is often the first crack in an offensive. Then the numbers start to follow him beyond that day. The big story people remember is Arracourt, but the war doesn't stop there. Carpenter keeps flying, he keeps pushing the boundary, and by war's end, he's officially credited with destroying 6 tanks. That tally matters because it's not a rumor, not a bar story. It's an institutional number attached to a man flying an aircraft that doctrine never intended to be an attacker. 6 tanks doesn't sound like much compared to a bomber's tonnage. Until you remember what platform did it. An unarmored observation plane wasn't supposed to destroy 1 tank. Ever. And that's where the doctrine shift shows up, not as a formal announcement that rewrites the manuals overnight, but as a behavioral change. Once commanders see results, they stop treating the idea like a joke. They may not love it. They may still call it reckless, but they can't deny the battlefield logic, a tiny aircraft that can loiter, spot patterns, and then strike at close range creates a tactical disruption out of proportion to its size. It forces enemy crews to keep scanning the sky for something they used to ignore. It adds a new layer of uncertainty, one more problem the enemy has to solve, while they're already busy solving artillery. Armor and infantry. Carpenter's success also changes the social rules around him. Before, he's the guy with a ridiculous contraption, tolerated like an eccentric. After, he's the guy people quietly want overhead when the next armored threat appears, because once you've seen a non-threat take real steel out of a fight, you never look at the same little airplane the same way again. The mockery doesn't vanish because everyone suddenly becomes kind. It vanishes because the number is too clean to laugh at. And the Germans adapt in the only way they can. They shoot at him. Hard. Relentlessly. The moment a grasshopper proves it can hurt armor, it stops being invisible. Every pass becomes riskier. Every rearm becomes a decision to go back into a fight where the enemy is waiting for you this time. That, too, is part of the doctrine lesson, because the value of Carpenter's tactic isn't that it's safe. The value is that it forces reactions. It forces attention. It forces delay. It forces a modern battlefield truth into an old rulebook not designed for combat is not the same thing as can't change the outcome. In the end, that's the shift his numbers create. They don't turn the L4 into a standard attack aircraft. They don't make the army suddenly encourage liaison pilots to hunt tanks. What they do is simpler and more permanent. They prove that results can rewrite what people are willing to tolerate, and that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't a bigger gun, but an enemy's failure to recognize a threat until it's already too late. After Arracourt. The story follows Carpenter the way smoke follows a fire. Not because the army suddenly turned his grasshopper into an approved attack platform, but because a result like that doesn't stay contained. 4 tanks in one fight becomes a reference point the moment people stop describing his Bazooka Plane as a gimmick and start describing it as a problem the enemy had to respect. And Carpenter keeps flying. He doesn't get to retire the risk just because the tactic worked. If anything, the price of success is that the Germans learn. Every time he appears after that. The return fire comes faster. The disbelief window that protected him in the beginning is gone. He is no longer an overlooked spotter. He is a known threat in the most fragile aircraft imaginable. Meaning every mission is a choice to keep trading safety for disruption. By the end of the war, he's officially credited with 6 tanks destroyed. That number matters because it's not what you'd expect from a fighter squadron or a dive bomber unit. It comes from a liaison pilot in a fabric observation plane that doctrine never intended to attack anything harder than a target map. 6 isn't strategic bombing. It's not thousands of tons of explosives. It's something more personal, a handful of armored vehicles removed from fights where a single tank could change the outcome for the troops underneath it. In that context, only 6 is the wrong way to read it. The right way is he got any at all repeatedly while flying an aircraft that had no right to survive the attempt. That's the legacy in plain terms. Carpenter didn't invent a new weapons system. He didn't rewrite the manuals with a memo. He proved a battlefield lesson that armies keep relearning design intent is not the same thing as combat reality. When the situation breaks the assumptions, improvisation becomes doctrine's emergency exit. And sometimes the advantage isn't better hardware, it's doing something the enemy doesn't even recognize as possible until the damage is already done. There's another lesson in his story that matters for anyone who watches war history for more than the highlight reels. Carpenter's tactic wasn't magic, and it wasn't luck. It was judgment under pressure. He picked moments when armor was exposed, used the L4's odd strengths tight turns, slow loitering, pattern recognition, and accepted a level of risk that most people would call unacceptable. That doesn't mean reckless. It means he understood the trade. He knew the cost of doing nothing. He knew how fast a ground fight can collapse when armor keeps its rhythm. So he chose the one thing that could disrupt that rhythm when other solutions weren't arriving in time. And that's why people still remember Bazooka Charlie. Not because a grasshopper with rockets is a cute footnote, but because it's a reminder that outcomes don't always come from the biggest platform or the cleanest doctrine. Sometimes they come from one person who refuses to accept the limit everyone else treats as law. If you want more true World War II stories like this, stories where a single decision under pressure forced the battlefield to admit something new, subscribe to WWII Echo Stories. And if anything in Carpenter's story surprised you, whether it was the risk, the improvisation, or the sheer audacity of that little L4, drop your take in the comments. Your thoughts help decide which forgotten moments we bring back next. Thank you for watching, because you're not just hearing this story, you're helping preserve it. Keeping Lieutenant Colonel Charles Bazooka Charlie Carpenter's name alive long after the guns went silent.